Hey everybody, welcome. Oh, how's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. Tonight is going to be awesome. It's going to be like super cool. And you're going to learn so much tonight. You're going to just learn so much tonight. That's all I got to say. I do On the Path, and I think On the Path was actually, I'm almost sure, the first thing I did, because I was on the path and I was documenting my work, right? And that's really what this organization is about, documenting work and coming up with new things and new ideas and really inflicting those ideas and shedding the light and the lies of neo-Platonism. And I think that the reason why we're doing this is because it is something that we really should, I would say, consider, because what the, I guess, common core knowledge of Druidism has just been washed down. And when we talk about real in-depth issues and real in-depth talks, we don't really get that from others. We get a lot of just nonsensical stuff. And so what me and others are trying to do right now is try to fulfill some of that and replace some of that emptiness, that hogwashness, if you will, and replace that with really good, substantial stuff, if you will. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about stuff. And tonight I called it fairy food. You guys want to eat some fairy food? And the fifth element, and why I think it's very important to highlight the fifth element, because while none of these shows are any way connected, each of these are courses, and those courses, okay, would be in the university, like this show would be an entire course, like an entire semester. My point is that these are just highlights. So if you enjoy these, then the university would be for you. And if you like what I have to say, then by all means, participate with the Druid Order of Blessed Stone and Wood, or any of the other conservative orders out there, or moderate orders out there, that are not programming you to believe that if you don't vote for the Green New Deal, you're going to die tomorrow and your life is a sin. So, because that is political indoctrination, and that is the political cult that is leading the charge in Druidism today, and we are stepping away from that radical liberal ideology. So let's begin. I'm Druid Nicholas, and I know a lot of you can't say my name. I don't know why many people have a problem with it. It's Nyo, as in gnocchi, my favorite food, one of my favorite foods. Nyo, okay. Claus, okay, like Santa Claus, right? De Clon, Nicholas de Clon, and so, I mean, if you can't say it, Druid works. I was going with Neo for a while, and I was like, that's kind of matrixy and makes me sound like I'm like the new one, and I don't want to be, I don't want to have any leadership, because I'll tell you what, me leading something, the whole damn thing will fall apart. So that's for damn sure. So anyway, let's begin. So tonight again, we're going to talk about the fifth element. We're going to talk about fairy food and why it's important. So let's get ready. Get out your books, your grimoires, whatever you need to take down notes. I don't have anything for you today. I usually do that on Serene Sundays, but tonight it's going to be a little bit different. Remember, I'm a little bit older than many of you, and maybe some of you have some years on me, but my sight is very bad. So I will be taking off my glasses to read, because I'm not going to be buying bifocals. All right, let's begin. So I guess tonight what I want to do is I want to talk about ether. And I want to talk about ether from a natural philosophical perception. And we're going to use a premise that I found in a book entitled Encyclopedia of the Fairies in World Folklore and Mythology by Teresa Bain. Okay, it looks something like that. Alright. So that's where we're going to start as a premise, and then we're going to move deeper and deeper into the roots of the abyss that we must get to understand not only what fairy food is, but understanding its composition. Okay? Alright. Let's begin with Teresa's thought. Alright? And I'll begin here. Here we go. So, Teresa starts, and I'm on page 138 of the book. Alright. Fairy food, sometimes called elves' food. Alright. The food the fairies serve at their festivals have been described by those few who have been fortunate enough to have eaten it and returned to tell the tale as having the most delicious flavor. Fairy food is said to taste like wheaten bread mixed with wine and honey. Humans who consume fairy food are said to have never become full and will, oftentimes will remain hungry. Alright? When a blessing or prayer is said over fairy food, it transforms into horse dung. Alright? Mortals who consume fairy food are not allowed to leave fairyland, but are forever physically transformed, no longer wholly mortal or human. When fairies eat human food, they are not actually consuming the physical object, but rather the Toradh, when the spiritual essence and substance of the food is consumed. When the Fae, that would be the collective of the fairies and of the metaphysical world, of the elementals, or sometimes referred to as mystics or mysticals. When the Fae actually eat a physical object, they eat barley meal, poisonous mushrooms, the milk of goats, and red deer hine, the roots of silverweed, the stalks of heather, toadstool, and the weeds gathered in the fields. Oatmeal is a food that will not necessarily repel the Fae, but will do nothing to lure them in. Alright, and then she quotes her sources. I wanted to start with that as a premise because I think that it's very important to understand and be reasonable enough that we could use that to begin with to have an actual, or me to present an argument on why fairy food is actually real, even though that might sound ridiculous and sort of semi-delusional. But when we deal with metaphysical stuff, we are, in a way, of the illusion. So, I want to talk about, I guess, to begin with, knowing what we've learned from Teresa Bain, we have to cover the branch of philosophy that encompasses or would encompass the subject of fairy food, or the fifth element. So, a lot of you would say, well, Druid Necklace or Druid, what is, I thought that there was only 4 branches of philosophy, and There are 4 branches of philosophy, no doubt, but when talking about Druidism, I like to include a 5th branch, and we'll go over those right now, just to summarize and to help you remember from your studies that you have worked on very hard. Number 1, ontology. Ontology. Ontology is, or answers the question, what is real? What is real? It deals with 2 subjects and others, but mainly the subjects of metaphysics and cosmology. Okay? Second, axiology. Axiology. Axiology is what is good. What is good? 2 subjects within that would be ethics, or I should say ethics and aesthetics, right? Ethics and aesthetics. The next branch of philosophy is something called epistemology. Epistemology. Epistemology talks about and answers the question of what is knowledge? What is knowledge? Okay? It deals with the subject of experience, right? And research. The 4th is logology. Logology. And that answers the question, what is truth? It deals with logic and rhetoric. And lastly, which would be quite Druidic, is the study of natural philosophy. And that answers the question of what is elemental. It deals with nature and time. So in a lot of, well, when I was scoffed at by the other Druids, talking about nature and time as being essential in Druidism, and not simply always focusing on nature, but they did that for a reason, because they're moving toward atheism. I would say that we need to deal with both nature and time instead of just simply nature. So with that, I think we should begin now by more closely evaluating what we're going to be talking about tonight. And the branch of philosophy that we'll be using tonight will be both natural philosophy, nature and time, and we're also going to deal with ontology, which is what is real, right? What is realistic. And not only what is real, but as Plato would say, what might be really real in the philosophy of forms. So we'll also be talking about metaphysics and cosmology. Okay? All right. Before we start, I want to read you something that deals with 2 very important terms. And later we're going to talk about the origin of these terms and the essence of the argument of who qualified these terms. The first is called Foyson, okay? And the second is called the Toradh, the Toradh. Both are, pardon me guys, I gotta turn off my, there we go. I had to turn off my, notifications. So, Foyson and the Toradh, and why that's such an important argument, okay? And why we need that argument to answer the question of what is fairy food and what is the 5th element, and how we can see and identify ether, okay? So let's talk about the origin of that. I want to read to you a segment. Actually, let me bookmark this because I'm going to need that for later. A segment that was written by Morgan Daimler, I believe that is, or I'm almost sure it's Daimler, it could be Daimler, but I'm almost sure it's Daimler, in 2017. He writes in his, I guess, dissertation, or if you will, book, it's Fairies, I would say an essay, but it's called Fairies, a Guide to the Celtic Fair Folk by Morgan Daimler in 2017. But see, we need to go beyond 2017 because we're no longer in 2017 and there's other developments like research. What do fairies eat, he writes. What do fairies eat? Like everything else, sorry guys, eyes are really, really bad, okay? Eyes are bad. Like everything else to do with themselves, there's actually no one simple answer, and it depends a lot on what sort of fairy we're talking about. There's also been a lot of speculation, even going back to the 17th century and the writings of the Reverend Kirk. Okay, we're going to go into Kirk in just later, okay, but just listen to this for a little bit, okay? That fairies may not eat our solid food at all, but rather absorb the essence of the food. What Kirk would call Foyson, Campbell called the Toradh. Now, this is the argument. This is the argument of the Foyson Toradh argument, and we're going to go into why and all that. Or Evens Wentz called the Quintessence. Quintessence essentially is, no pun intended, the fifth element, okay? Ether. It was for this reason that food offered to the fairies, or which it was believed that they had consumed the essence of, was not considered fit for human consumption, nor even for animals to eat. Evens Wentz in 1911. Again, though, this may be something that is true of some types, while others do literally consume the item itself, without getting into what may traditionally be offered to fairies, but only looking at what folklore tells us they are known to consume. Here are some general things we can say to give people an idea of what different fairies eat, okay? Now, I'm only going to go into a couple of these, okay? I'm not going to go into all of these because we're not going to go into specifics. Obviously, this would be in the course that I would teach it, but not for this short presentation. Number one, some fairies eat corn, a general term for grains, as in maize, right? Bread and drink, liquor and milk, okay? Fairies will steal. Fairies will steal and presumably eat any and all human food and produce if the owner of it speaks badly about it by taking the Toradh out of it so that it gives no value to the humans. All right? And now finally I'm going to go into something that Wilde had pointed out, and that is fairies are known to take the substance of and from such crops as turnips and grain, and will take butter if they can. They will also steal quality food from the hearth. I say hearth, I don't say I use hearth, okay? Others would say other pronunciations. That is cooking, or hearth, I should say, but I use the word hearth. Okay, such as meat, vegetables, leaving behind something wasted or unpleasant in its taste. Now, Daimler goes on and on and on, ad nauseum. But, I mean, for good reason, too. He goes on ad nauseum to clarify this idea of what fairies would have eaten, and then why they would have eaten it, and then begins to allude to what happens if a human being eats the food of the fairies that have already been consumed. Does that human get sick and whatnot? Okay? This is so important. So important, you guys. It's so important because when we begin to evaluate this idea of what fairy food is and why it's important, we could even codify that in the, I would say, ex cathedra proclamation, speaking from the wood, meaning from the chair, and more importantly, speaking in a way that is without fault in the Eucharist, or in the Eucharist, which would have been either the host at Catholic ritual or Catholic Church, ancient rituals such as the Egyptian consuming the bread of Ra, right? Sun god, mostly sun gods, if not almost always sun gods, but there's other examples, and I'll give those later tonight. But also, maybe even in the story of Lou, right? When Lou dies and dies for the folk and says, I'm dying for you, I'm being sacrificial for you, and I'm leaving you me to eat. And so when we begin to speak about these sorts of things, we begin to highlight why this is such a very radical idea. And for the time, this is right around the time when the church is beginning to start talking about moving from consubstantiation to transubstantiation. We're going to go into that much later. You're not ready for that just yet, guys. Maybe some of you are. Okay. So let's talk about language and Sanskrit for just a second, okay? All right. I really do either need new glasses or I'm just going to can it and be like, totally blind. I see underwater. I don't see anything right now, basically, except shapes and colors. In Sanskrit, okay, we have a very unique word, and it's spelled S-V-A-B-H, which is considered one letter, A-V-A, okay? Shwa, va, you're not touching the lips, va, right? Va, and then you're pronouncing the V. Va, shwa, va, shwa, va, okay? So very clearly three distinct sounds. Now, when we see Sanskrit and we see the DH or the BH, right? We see the DH and the BH in Gaelic, right? That's how we know that there is definite warrant and substantial evidence that the Celtae of the Gaul, of I would say even Galatian or Gaul, had to have come, at least in some part, from the Near East, Middle East, and even in some cases the Far East, okay? And that would be south rather than north, moving along and into Japan, but we're not going to go there right now. Now, when we talk about Gaelic and we talk about schwa, va, schwa, va, okay, DH always, almost always in every single word in Gaelic has something to do with one being, that would be the DH. But we're not talking DH here, we're talking BH here. And when you see BH in a word in Gaelic, it has to do with one becoming. So either one being or one becoming or one's own being or one's own becoming. And in this case, it is very clear that as we're talking about what the fairies consume, we are then talking about a differential in what is there and what is being consumed, therefore proclaiming that it is absolute truth, that what is there and what is being consumed are two separate things. Why is this important? It's important because it deals with becoming and what becomes. Shwabhava is the intrinsic nature essential to beings. And if you have an intrinsic nature essential to beings, it is, in essence, one's own becoming. Its own becoming. We see this in food. When we take food, right? We take food, it's digested, it changes again as it goes down into the digestive tract and into the intestines, both small and large, and then, is evacuated. It looks completely different, as you all know, from the time that we took it to its final state. That is proof, in a way, that while it is the basically we absorb the essence, right, and evacuate what we don't need, just as the fairies do, right? That's why Shwa Va is very important. Intrinsic nature. That is essential to being. And things essential to being have two parts. They have something called accidents, and they have something called essence. Accidents would be, say, this cue card here. As you can see, it has white. It's white. It's thin. I feel it. I could, it sways in the air, right? Those are the accidents of this. We know that, it's if it's recycled paper, let's say it was made just from the tree, then we know that it's definitely what is visible, okay? And so accidents would be that, though essence is something more deep. While accidents are what we perceive, the perceptions received from this, the perceptions we receive from this are the accidents. The essence would be the invisible, I wrote, aspects of this. As we would talk about, table and tableness. We talk about the table that we eat on. We talk about the table that has a hard surface made from wood, 4 legs, right? The grain in the wood, right? But that in some other realm, there's this tableness that may not even look like a table at all, but is recognizable as our human collectiveness is. For example, and I bring this example up as a Druid to you, if I were to ask each and every one of you to draw a tree, you would all draw your trees. I may look at your tree and you may look at my tree, and I might not even recognize it as a tree. Might be like, what the hell is that crap? You might say the same to me. I might say to you, you know what, that's a really nice piece of work. You might say equally back. But that in some other world, in the very real world, not this real world, in the really real world, there is this treeness that every single being can look to, look at, and say, that, my friend, that, my kin, is a tree. So what makes it different? What makes it different is that it must be universal. It must be Catholic in nature. And that Catholicity is that universal idea of what is really real. It is recognizable to all, yet each is different. Now we'll talk about each accident and essence in more detail. Accident. Accident I define as the actuality and attributes of a thing. The actuality and attributes of a thing. The actuality and attributes of a thing. That would be the accidents, right? It is the lowest form of something, that which in a sense has fallen, if we're looking at from an etymological point of view. And all of these accidents could wither away so that the only thing you're left with is the essence of that sway. So an accident is the actuality and attribute of a thing. It's the lowest form of something. It's that which has fallen from, an etymological point of view. And then these accidents could wither away. They could die off, right? The difference between accidents and essence is very clear. Now, in essence, I define it not as the actuality, but I define it as, and attributes obviously, I define it as substance and potentiality of a thing. Substance and potentiality. What can be. Remember? Schwa. Va. Right? Schwa. Va. Is what? That intrinsicness of becoming. And whenever we have the BH in a word, it is no longer being, it is becoming. And that's what we're focusing on when we talk about the essence. Okay? It is that substance. It is that potentiality. What is our greatest potential? Who are we tomorrow? What is our greater version of tomorrow than we are today? What is that? What is that I've been teaching you from day one of being the better version of you tomorrow than you are today? That which has not been, but that which is in existence and that which already lives, but has not been achieved because you are simply an accident reaching the essence of who you really are and who you are becoming. Sluncha. The essence, I write, is the highest form of something. Now, if we're looking at it from a point of linguistics, an etymological point, it's that which has risen, not fallen. Quite the opposite, right? Finally, whereas the accidents then wither away, the essence will always be. So essence, again, is what? It is the substance and potentiality of a thing. It is a highest form of something. Linguistically and etymologically, it is that which has risen. And finally, these will always be and will never wither away like the accidents. Right? What am I saying? I speak to you as Druid Aclosticlon, saying that I can stick this in water, let it wither away, and that the remainder will always be, even if it's invisible. Dear atheists, you live with the greatest sickness, and the sickness is a lie. Now, compared to energy, okay, because this is super duper important. If we take accidents and we compare them to energy, and we take essence and we compare it to energy, okay, energy itself. Now, I'm not going to use the word source, because I truly do believe that energy itself is tetrarian and is a tetrachonomy that matches our own Druidic tetrachonomy. Accidents are things that descend in a setter or order, and as it descends from the point of already being far away from energy, which is the absence of energy, or absence, or complete absence, okay? Accidents descend from energy. Whereas essence doesn't descend from energy, it ascends toward energy. And again, I'm not using the word source for a very specific reason, because I do believe that energy has 4 purposes, and that is the purpose of source, force, course, and dors. We're not going to go into that now, but I say that in the Druid prayer. Okay. This is important. Why? Because the closer you get toward energy, the more the more you achieve enlightenment. You are ascending toward energy. But the more you move away from energy, your accidents, if you will, are descending from the woke mob. The woke AF mob. And this brings me to a very important point, and I want to talk to you about Aristotelianism. Aristotelianism is the idea of, if you will, the philosophy and way of Aristotle. Aristotle brings up the most important question. What categorizes matter? What categorizes matter? What categorizes matter? And when we zoom toward that, we're moving away. When we zoom toward, matter, we are actually moving away from energy, because matter itself is the child of Time Father and Earth Mother. You cannot only have Earth Mother, as my opposition teaches. What categorizes matter the child of Time Father and Earth Mother is something called hylomorphism. Hylomorphism. Hylomorphism is the word morphism, M-O-R-P-H-I-S-M, with the word hylo in front, which is H-Y-L-O. It is two words. And it is hylomorphism that categorizes matter, which is the child of Earth Mother and Time Father. But it is very interesting, because together, those two words, high and low, H-Y-L-O, mean one word. Hylo means, get ready for this, you could shit yourself at any time, just have enough toilet paper with you. Hylo means tree. Tree. Morph means form. It is in essence tree form. That tree-ness that I was speaking about earlier. That if you were being asked right now to draw a tree, you would draw that tree and that would be your tree. Unique to you and yourself, but not unique to others. And that's why we are more than our identity, which is only an accident. Our identities are not important. Our substance is, the character is, as Dr. Martin Luther King so rightly talks about. And I think because he was a reverend, he would have understood this all very well. So that hylo means tree form. The form of the tree, not the tree that you were asked to draw, or that I was asked to draw, the tree that unites all of us. Up there, or down there. That it, or both, that is beyond. That hylo, that treeness, is that tree that when we look at, all of us right now could look at and say, yep, that's tree. While I might look at yours and say, that's a pretty shitty drawing of a tree. You may look at mine and say, that's even a crappier drawing of a tree. I may look at yours and say, that's an awesome drawing of a tree. And you might look at mine and say, you better market that shit. So that hylomorphism is tree formism, the theory of forms. Going back to tree-ness, going back to table-ness. That ness is what makes it. And we're even going to go into Loch-ness later. Lake-ness, if you will. We're not going to, just a little foreshadowing what I'm going to talk about. I'm just so excited. This is awesome. Okay, now, ready? All right, so, I'm not going to queen out on you now. All right, here you go. All right, so, now when we compare that, if you will, when we compare that Aristotelianism, the idea of hylomorphism, if you will, of what categorizes matter, what categorizes matter is the tree form. The tree form. End of story. But remember, if hylo means tree, and hylo is two words, then we're starting to talk about Druid. Or not. Two words. Deru, vid. Hylomorphisms, or tree forms, have 4 polarities, and I'm going to give them to you, starting with that which is closest to energy and that which is farthest from energy. Okay? In the first polarity, we have the closest to energy and then the farthest from energy. The closest to energy would be substance. The farthest from energy would be attributes. In the second polarity, closest to energy would be form. Farthest from energy would be matter. Form and matter. In the third polarity, we have potentiality, which is closest to energy, and actuality, which is farthest from energy. Again, potentiality and actuality. And in the fourth polarity, we have the closest to energy, which is essence, and farthest from energy, we have accidents. Okay? Now, Hylo has no origin as of yet, until today. I mean, even Morgan Daimler, I would say, in 2017 talked about it, but never found it. And so, it isn't that I disagree with Daimler or any of the folks, Campbell or Kirk, that he talked about, and, Wentz, but what I want to say is that I don't think he did enough justice to fairy food as he did in so much as identifying it, okay? Because he did a great service by adding to it. But I think he fell short on delineating the reasons for it. You see what I'm saying? And that's, in a lot of ways, sometimes what Neopaganism does. It simply just gives you the Druid catechism. Who is God? God is, and that's why I will never define God for you or the gods for you, because that is up to you, not me. I'm only here to help if you ask. I cannot help you if you do not ask. That's what Druids do. We are mediators between God and man. They've always been that, and they always will be that. So, until now, Hylo hasn't really, and still doesn't, even in most etymologies, it doesn't. But what I can't seem to grip is why. Because something so easy for me is so difficult for, say, even Chambers. High, H-Y, becomes high, H-I-G-H. Low, L-O, becomes L-O-W. As in a tree, the highest point and the lowest point. So that high, though, is actually to say, look above. Low, L-O, is to say, look below. High in Proto-Celtic is segel, S-E-G-L. Low in Proto-Celtic is loku. Sound familiar? Perhaps? Loki? High, okay, is power. It is literally translated as power. In some cases, even overpowering. But we'll just stick with power for now. Low, L-O, is translated as lake. Okay? Local. Now, what is the lake? The lake goes below, right? Goes below. Power is there, right? Above. And so now we see clearly in the positioning of hylomorphism or tree form that in the tree, as above, so below. And we even see that in the talisman, the Celtic talisman, which is basically, sort of, I don't want to say points, but pointing up and pointing below with the roots in the middle. All right. Matter has always been defined as assembled things. Matter's always been defined as assembled things. Matter, the child of Time Father and Earth Mother, is always been assembled things. Assembly as in time, and things as in what? Nature. So, Earth Mother and Time Father. One thing I want to do right now is point out something so incredibly important. And that is the ascending and descending order of which accidents, right, and essence would, devolve and evolve. Okay. Assembled things move away from energy by going from, the accidents of it, if you will, the attributes, then lower, and then the actuality of it. Ascending would be just the opposite. That you first have the potentiality I talked about, the substance, and then the essence, which is closest to energy. So that you can see very clearly that we go from accidents, attributes, and then the actuality, and then move from potentiality to substance to essence to energy. Okay? So it's almost as if you have energy here and absence here. And you have then, if energy is here and absence is here, then it would make sense that if energy is here and absence is here, then the essence is here and the accidents are here. Okay? But the step right before essence, as I called out just earlier, is substance. Substance theory says this. It asks, how many substances are there for each and every thing? Each and every thing. Each and every being two completely different words. Each is the thing itself. The very thing itself is identified with the word each. Every is the things that it makes up in the entire world, if you will. I'll just use world as a metaphor. But all things, each and every. Each is the item. Every is everyone that exists, right? So if we talked about that tree again, then each would be the one tree, right? And then every would be every tree in the world. Does that make sense, right? Okay. So why is that important? Because we are going to give right now 4 sets of substance theory as examples. All right? Number 1, each and every, keep that in mind, each and every. Monism. In monism, each would be the number one, every would be the number one. So that there is one thing, and one completely. There's only one thing, and then one thing in the world. In dualism, there is one thing, right? And then you have two things in the world, in dualism. Triism says that there are three things, and that there's one here, one here, one here, so you have three that make up the each, if you will. So in this is, and then let me just go in, and then tetraism is 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Each and every. So let me be clear. When I say this, I'm talking about each and every. Let's just take, say for example, I guess the Dagda. Well, it's not really a good example. I'm trying to think of a good example. You know what? Let's just use any trinity. All right? Let's use any trinity. So that trinity would be what? Triism, right? Each would say that one thing is 3. And every is that 3 is made up of 3 distinct things. Do you see what I'm saying? To complete the each. I hope I made that very clear to you. Alright? The cleanest example of hylomorphism is in transubstantiation. And I talked to you about that earlier in the Eucharist. I said that even in the Eucharist, but I'll go into that just later. Let me talk about this with Lou, and I'll talk about it with Falnish. And, Lou, the God, Lord Lou, says, I'm going to sacrifice myself and become bread. It is his potentiality to become bread, and then he becomes bread, right? Falnish then transubstantiates water, the dog, the hound of Lou, right? Transubstantiates water into wine, right? And then the Eucharist itself is and means what? Good chrism, good holiness, good oil. The oil anointed on heads. And that Christian clan, that Christian cult that existed pre-Christ, pre-Jesus, if you will. Good chrism, good itself in the Eucharist. Could be God, it could be Odin, Adonai, Adonis, and interestingly enough, finally, essence itself. Okay? Two important words, one important argument now. We get into what? We get into Morgan Daimler's talk, and even the work of Teresa Bain, who also points this out. It is the argument of Foyson and the Toradh. And Foyson is argued by Kirk, while the Toradh is argued by Campbell. Foyson is the high part. The Toradh is the low part. And Robert Kirk, obviously, is a, Scottish folklorist. And in 1893, he then writes The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, right? He strongly attacks atheism. He strongly attacks atheism with this proposition of Foyson, and says that, basically, dear atheist, he says, power exists. power itself exists. You can't see it. You can feel it. You can sense it. But in itself, it is clearly invisible until activated, right? So he uses power to argue the idea that the metaphysical world does exist, and he uses power as a very clean example of this. In essence, he says that Foyson, power, is what the fairies are taking away from the food. They take the power away. They take the power out of it and leave nothing left. They leave devil left. That's where we get the word devil's food from. Devil's food doesn't mean the food of the devil. It's the food of the weak. It's junk. And that comparison between devil's food and fairy food, or if you will, angel food, right, is a clear example of how Kirk then goes and attacks atheism, saying and using the idea of power. Now, I think I said Campbell earlier. I'm very sorry about that. It was supposed to be Kirk the entire time. So that's Robert Kirk. Now, the second argument, and I want to talk about Foyson for just a second, because Foyson is from Old Occitan, meaning Occidental, the idea of the West. Power is Foyson, is high. Okay? Alright. So, moving forward, you guys, now we move into the low. Just like Robert Kirk identified the high in Foyson, John Campbell, Gregorson Campbell, who's also a Scottish folklorist, in 1891 writes The Gaelic Otherworld, okay? And in that he talks about the Fians, okay? And he then begins to talk about the low in Hylo. And he says that the Fian were the deer men, and that the deer men were a fairy race. And if we want to play the race card, folks, now's the time to do it on the deer men. He attacks atheism differently, strategically against Kirk, saying, well, if Kirk's going to go, high, I guess I'm going to go low. And he does so very eloquently. He attacks atheism by preserving traditional tales as quoted at the time called the Toradh. And it is also the same stuff that the fairies eat, but he uses it differently. So he's using the fact of the lake, right? Whereas Kirk is using power. The lake, he's saying, is deep. And that deepness is unseen just as well. And just because it's unseen doesn't mean it doesn't exist, if you will. It might be unseen for now, but it certainly wouldn't be that. And it means foundation. Now, interestingly enough, the Toradh is also Hebrew for the word Torah, which is the foundation, the invisible, the underneath, but that which holds everything together. You can't have the high without the low. You can't have the low without the high to have something complete. Right? And I think that that's what Campbell is trying to identify, speaking against Kirk in this Foyson Toradh argument. We even say Toradh when we come to a party. Why? Because then we become the foundation of that party. Toradh. It is the surprise that becomes evident. Okay. So that, interestingly enough, the Toradh is the foundation, and Foyson is power. Okay? Foyson is power. And there is a relationship between, if you just wanted to know, the word poison and the word Foyson. Both the Toradh, the foundation, and the Foyson, the power, okay, completes energy, the source, force, course, endorse. It is the bounty. It is the harvest. And that basically is speaking in a way of that which is harvested from the food, the fairy food. And when we take that harvesting from it, we harvest that power. Or, in a way, Campbell, which would be the Toradh, we're taking the foundation out of it. Both are saying the same exact thing. High and low are equal in this matter. That's why we say, as above, so below. It's the same thing. I guess that's why it would be very difficult for me to say that the devil is down there for, when I was practicing Catholic, the devil is down there and God is up there. And I just kind of don't see any logic in that. I think both are beyond, if you will. So that the Toradh and Foyson together then are instruction for law for foundation. In conclusion, I write this: a foundation is laid down and set. It is the basis of all things seen. It is the unseen of that which is seen. And even Walter Evens Wentz understood this so greatly when he coined quintessence, a term that is the fifth element of celestial bodies. It was this that fairies ate from divisible food. I think today we've learned so much. We've learned and took a tour from what the fairies ate, what was left. We talked about and delved in the idea of transubstantiation and Aristotelianism. We talked about the highs and the lows. We talked about the essence. We talked about the accidents. But most importantly, I think, for most of us, we identified that we can be better versions of us tomorrow than we are today by understanding all of this philosophy. Both this from philosophy from an ontological point of view and a natural point of view. But we also see that this is something that is so interesting and complex, knowing that tonight we did basically prove that ether does exist. And is that ether, if you will, that vita, as in vitamin? You don't see the vitamins, but they're there, right? The essence. You don't see the essence, but it's there. And that's sort of the idea. And we've learned it, as above from below. What we take in and what we evacuate. What we're evacuating is basically the accidents, and what we're taking in, and it also becomes the processing for that which the body needs. That becomes invisible. Just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's not there. Two very great arguments against atheism, as you should argue everything against atheism, which is an illness. Now, I want to talk about, lastly, and I just came up with this because I thought it'd be fun, what fairies do eat and what they don't eat. Me, I leave out everything for the fairies. If they want it, they want it. They don't, they don't. But in the morning especially, I usually share whatever I'm eating. And I think it's important to, to sort of do that. You don't have to necessarily leave out these things, but I just want to show you that food with substance for the fairies and food without substance for the fairies. Okay? Food without substance. Leavened bread. Barley. Mushrooms. Goat milk. Red deer hide. Weed root. Food with substance for the fairies. Unleavened bread. Salt. Marigold. Red berries, any kind. Foods with iron. And also iron, copper, and bronze metals. The foods, they say, that keep fairies away would be oatmeal. In all cases, most people would agree with that. But I would say that I think, after evaluating all this tonight, I think that all things have accidents and substance. I don't think anything is without substance. So I think we really, after this research, have come up with some very interesting points about what fairy food is and why they seek quintessence, as so should we. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I hope that you understood most of it, and if you didn't, I would play it back and re-listen to it and enjoy it and love it, and know that sometimes we need to look beyond to see and understand the simpler things. And that is, I guess, the quintessence of life, right? The vita, the vitamin. It is the Toradh, or Toradh. It is the Foyson, or poison, right? Power. You poison someone, you have power over them. And in the Toradh, it's the law, and laws are foundations. So, tonight we really did a good deal work in identifying, a premise. Started out with Teresa Bain from her book Encyclopedia of Fairies in the World, and World Folklore and Mythology, and then we also delved into Campbell's work. We also looked into Kirk's work, and then, using the opening argument of Morgan Daimler, Daimler, in 2017. His work, Fairies, A Guide to the Celtic Fair Folk, and basically fairies means white folk, white people. So, many people would say that, fairies are bad or good or this or that. I don't believe in absolutes. Some people would say, I remember Thomas Sheridan would say fairies are very nasty things. Me, I get along well with the ethereal world and those in it. I try to be balanced in my communications with that, and when connecting with that, I think it's important. So I hope you learned a lot, and I hope that you'll continue to join me on the path. Weeknights, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I don't usually say daylight saving or standard because it kind of confuses people, so I just say Eastern Time, whenever that is, okay? But I don't know how many more I'll do. I may do one on the path at the end of this month, right before Samhain or Samhain. There's that MH, right? That's another letter that comes from the Near East or Middle East. So again, I really would hope that you join me as much as I can possibly do. I can only do so much, and especially now being in a city that is really been overturned by corruption and riots and theft, all in the name of something that's justified. I hardly believe that it is us coming against the Roman Empire. That's who these, if you will, these people are. To rob and steal and loot, abuse. None of that is justified. Ever. When you destroy. You see, because accidents have to wither on their own. But you can never take away the substance. Sure, you might take down a statue, but what that statue represents is standing even taller. Just because you wrote ACAB across it, or colonizer across it, you've actually empowered it. I guess that'll teach you a little lesson. Think before you do. Don't act. Ponder. Don't move. Wait. Be prudent in what you do. Be conservative in how you move. Think. Not right now. Not immediately. In time. It can't be done right now, right here. It must be done in due process. And that itself, folks, is quintessence of fairy food. Have a good night, everybody. I am Druid Noclastapon, founder of the Druid Circle, founder of Druid Order of Blessed Stone and Wood, and founder of Druid University, along with Druid Living, a conservative pagan media outlet. And again, if you can't say my name, as I did pronounce it in the beginning many times, hell, I thought about it. Neo? Nah, not so much. I'm not the one. I'm not the chosen. I'm just a person. So Druid works. Druid's always good. Have a good day, everybody. And I hope you really did like this presentation on the path.